Hello, my name is Gary Arnold, Public Affairs Manager at Access Living, and welcome to Adapt of Chicago Productions. Today we are shooting an interview at Access Living, and we're going to be talking about transportation and accessible transportation. With me is Aziza Nassar. Aziza is a colleague of mine at Access Living. She works in the Home and Community Ombudsman program at Access Living. But Aziza is also a transportation advocate and a consumer of transportation. So to begin with, let's just talk about transportation in general. Why is transportation important for disabled people, for non-disabled people? Why is it important for everyone?
So first off, thank you so much for having me. I'm definitely not an expert, but I'm a transportation advocate and user of a lot of different transportation systems in Chicago. And as a person with a physical disability, navigating those systems, can be somewhat tricky. And I think that to answer your question about why transportation is so important is, in my opinion, transportation is really how you can navigate other systems in your life. So in order to have a job and sustain yourself and your life, you need to be able to access that job, getting to and from work. And how do you do that? You need an accessible system that will get you to and from your job. A lot of disabled people depend on these accessible transportation systems to get them to and from their medical appointments, to see the doctors, to see their community care providers. And when there's a gap in those systems, then it leaves people without services and at the end of the day vulnerable and at risk to nursing home placements and other things. Which brings me to the point of housing. Having a meaningful, accessible transportation system in your area will determine whether or not you'll find housing as well. So accessible transportation really is the center of living life as a person in a community.
Right. Yeah.
Not just for disabled people, but for people in general.
So going back, I want to go back to that housing point you made. That was interesting. I hadn't really been thinking about that. So one thing I'm interpreting from what you're saying is it's important to find housing in an area where there are transportation options. Otherwise, let's say, we've heard the term food desert before in Chicago, but let's apply that to transportation. If you're in a transportation desert, maybe where there's not access to accessible train lines or bus routes or taxi service, etc., then that's going to limit your options.
It's going to limit your options, and at the end of the day, limit your livelihood too. And people are not going to do that, especially if they want to be integrated into the community. Mm-hmm. I'm currently looking for accessible, affordable housing, and one of the first things I look at is how close is it to an L station that's accessible, because I need to be able to just get in and out. Most disabled people don't drive, can't afford a car, can't afford to sustain transportation, a car. And so they really depend on public transportation to navigate the city. And so, it's important to have that close to your home.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's talk for a minute. From you, based upon your experience, what is the difference between being a consumer of transportation in Chicago, excluding private vehicles? Consumer of transportation, so CTA, taxis, and transportation network providers or Uber or Lyft, things like that. What's the difference between being a disabled consumer and a non-disabled consumer, and specifically a disabled consumer who uses a wheelchair or some sort of access device?
So if you're disabled like myself, you know there's a lot of planning that goes into just taking a trip somewhere. You need to research and know the transportation that you're using. Is that elevator at such and such stop working? Is there an elevator, first of all, and is it working? Certain train lines run at a certain time, making sure that that's a thing, and you're going to be able to get in and out of that. But also, what if this elevator that I'm going to use on CTA, for example, is out of service?
Mm-hmm.
Am I within a decent amount of close proximity of another working functional elevator that I can use and to kind of navigate that broken elevator? As somebody who's not disabled, or someone who isn't disabled wouldn't have to think about that. If an elevator is not working, I'll just take the escalator, or I'll take the stairs, and it should be fine. Or if the train is not working, I can just hop in a cab or take an Uber, and it'll get me there fine.
Right.
As a disabled cab user, I have to call in a dispatch center, a call center, and let them know ahead of time I use a power wheelchair. I need a vehicle that is accommodating to me. I'm being picked up from this location to be dropped off at this destination. And sometimes if I have a friend that's with me that also uses a wheelchair, making sure we provide the correct information about the dimensions of the chair. So there's a lot of planning that goes into just traveling as a person with a disability.
Right. So how often do you use taxis on average a month, let's say?
I use it at least 3 or 4 times.
Yeah. And probably unlike people who don't use wheelchairs, you don't really, or what is there the option of going out onto the sidewalk, onto the street, and flagging down a cab for you and a friend?
What? Honestly, I have never tried, because I have never seen anyone do it. And chances are you're not going to find an accessible vehicle right then and there on the corner of the street to hail down. But also, as being physically disabled, I'm unable to flag down a taxi. I can't physically lift my hand to signal to a cab driver to let them know that I need a taxi. And so, if I do need to or want to do that, I would need to have somebody with me to flag a cab down. But that's
in your experience, though, with those 3 to 4 rides a month on average, when you call and schedule them, is it fairly reliable? Will they show up within a decent amount of time and send the appropriate vehicle?
For the most part, I think the cabs system, the dispatch system has gotten a lot better, and that's through a lot of advocacy work by Access Living and other people to increase the accessible fleet in Chicago. Before about 6 months ago to maybe a year, there was very limited wheelchair accessible taxis out, and so it was difficult. Sometimes I would wait a half an hour to an hour maybe for a taxi, and that's definitely gotten better. Times now look more like 15 to 20 minutes, and sometimes even less.
Yeah, okay. So it's my understanding that you serve on an accessibility advisory committee. Is it for the CTA?
Yes.
For the CTA. What's the role, what's your role on that committee, and what's the role of the committee as a whole?
Yeah, so Access Living has always done some work around transportation, and we haven't had an active role for some time, and so Amber Smock came to me with the idea to apply for this board, and what it is it's an ADA advisory board that CTA has for consumers with disabilities across Chicago to provide input for people, to provide input to CTA about how the train system is working and what things they can do to improve it for disabled riders.
Okay.
And we meet quarterly at CTA headquarters, and just, we talk about, elevator efficiencies, and or other, pressing concerns that happen. We sometimes train staff and others about accessibility issues and things like that.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's talk for a minute about most people, most viewers, and most you and I often refer to these companies as rideshare companies, companies like Uber and Lyft. They've really kind of grown a lot in the past few years. Most people, know what they are. I think technically they're referred to as transportation network providers, not really rideshare companies. But what do you think of a company like Uber and Lyft, and why do you think they're an important piece of transportation in a city like Chicago?
Yeah, I think that this new kind of model of transportation is quite a brilliant model of transportation. It kind of just blew up into this huge thing that people are now utilizing on a day-to-day basis. It's cheap and it's user-friendly, and you don't have to wait long periods of time. The thing is, we're being left out, though. We are a part of the community, and, because this is a private system, not everyone has an accessible vehicle to just, use and ride. And I think my only issue is, if you are going to provide this service for, to the community, that you need to be inclusive about it.
Right.
If it's done in a meaningful way, I think it'll really help out my community, the disabled community. I live on the southwest side of Chicago, and getting a transportation on the southwest side of Chicago is difficult.
Right.
And if there were, Ubers or Lyfts or whatever rideshare company vehicles that are out in the street that's accessible, I think a lot of people would use it.
Right, yeah.
But
so what you're saying, if I could interrupt for a minute, on the southwest side, you're not going to have the same kind of taxi availability as you do downtown,
exactly.
But it would be great to be able to go onto your phone and use the Uber or the Lyft app and order a car or a van and be picked up, usually within 5 or 10 minutes, which is what many users across Chicago can now do, right? So
certain TNPs like Uber have an accessibility option. They do. However, it ends up costing the disabled rider more, because what Uber does is they'll reach out to the dispatch center that I was originally calling and say, we need an accessible vehicle. Can you provide us with an accessible vehicle? And, not only will they charge for the fare that you're using the car, but also that fee that they're charged by the dispatch center.
Right.
So at the end of the day, you're charging a disabled rider more money to use your system.
Yeah.
And
what I understand, that additional fee is a $2 fee, correct?
It is a $2.
And the rate, am I wrong here? I from what I understand, the rate that you're charged is a taxi rate, not the typical Uber rate,
exactly,
right?
Exactly.
So you are definitely getting a much higher a higher rate. So basically, yeah, if I was a wheelchair user and I wanted to use the Uber app, they would connect me. They would actually get a taxi, an accessible taxi for me, charge me the taxi rate plus a $2 service charge.
Exactly.
Right. So that's right. You're getting charged much more, or at least more than a non-disabled car and rider. I just want to share a few statistics that I have that I gathered in. 3 months. If you look at a snapshot of 3 months toward the end of the calendar year 2015, in the months of October, November, and December, Uber averaged 3 million rides in each of those months. But if you look at the total number of accessible trips that Uber provided up through August of 2015, since they first came to Chicago and started tracking numbers, the total number of accessible trips that they completed is only 14. So that's not even a minuscule number. You're talking millions of rides that Uber is providing, and they're not providing those that accessibility option. So why is this a problem?
I think most, like I said earlier, most disabled people don't have cars. They don't own their own transportation. We depend really on public transportation, paratransit, or these TNPs to get around, and so it's actually hurting us as disabled people more than somebody who's not disabled, right? Because I feel like non-disabled people, can find another way to get around. They can hop on a bike. They can, have a friend drop them off somewhere. They may have their own vehicle already. Whereas somebody like me who was left stranded because an elevator is out of service, for example, can't just do that, And so having like these Uber-like ride-share programs extend it out to disabled people. It's in their benefit. It's to, we'd be the ones using this more than anyone else, and so, and also because we are a part of the community. We are, living right next to, our non-disabled counterparts, and we deserve the same access. It's our right. Right. Yeah. So.
And the thing is, unless these rideshare programs start to operate on kind of a level playing field, it's going to threaten some of the existing options that riders with disabilities now have. Because as the rideshare or the transportation network providers grow, that's kind of threatening the taxi business, and you'll see a decline in terms of the taxi fleet, and that's only going to have an impact probably on the number of accessible vehicles that are on the road. And from what I understand, also there's this accessibility fund that the Chicago taxi fleet invests into each month, and that money is to go toward renovating existing vehicles in order to make them accessible, with the idea of increasing the number of accessible vehicles that are in the fleet. But that number is going to continue to decline also if there's not investment and if the taxi fleet shrinks.
I think the biggest misconception is people think that just because a vehicle is accessible that other people can't use it, and so they're limited to only picking up disabled riders. And that's completely false. People can use the accessible vehicles to get to the airport. For example, there are mothers with strollers, people with walkers, and just families who utilizes, and also most of these vehicles have seating also available. So it's not just an empty, car that's just a shell with with just a wheelchair user space.
Right.
So I think that people like to give the excuse, oh, well, there aren't that many disabled riders, but at the end of the day, that's just an excuse, and so.
Right. But there is, I want to spend a few minutes talking about that there is an advocacy campaign going on now that people with disabilities and their allies can rally around in order to try to hold some of these transportation network providers accountable. Alderman Anthony Beal of the Ninth Ward, the City Council, has introduced an ordinance. And an ordinance includes many different things, but it's an ordinance that Access Living is getting behind, because what we think it will do is it will be a good first step in terms of leveling the playing field in terms of transportation network providers. What it will do, this ordinance will require, just as the Chicago taxi fleet is now required to have 5% rate of accessible vehicles, this will require the transportation network providers to have a 5% accessible vehicle rate within their fleet. And similarly, as important, the rates will be the same. Under this ordinance, riders who require accessible vehicles will not be charged a higher fare. So I think from where we're coming from, where Access Living is coming from, and what most people agree, is these transportation network providers are a great thing. They're a great addition to transportation in Chicago. They offer amazing flexibility and can really help a lot of people out in terms of providing another transportation option. And what people with disabilities are asking for is that option be extended to our community. We want to have the opportunity to participate on a level playing field in that resource, just like everybody else. So is there anything you want to add to that?
No, I think we've covered it all. I think I urge people who are watching to reach out to their aldermans as well, to join the campaign, to make sure that they research this, and if they believe that we as disabled people should have the same access, that they also join this campaign, and to reach out to us, and we can better connect you if you need help. But thank you.
All right, well, thank you for joining us today. We've been talking to Aziza Nassar with Access Living. My name is Gary Arnold, and you've been watching Chicago Adapt of Chicago Productions. Thank you very much. We'll see you next time.